I'm Drew Holmes. When I started learning to make music, I thought that the only way to have a career in the industry was as a performer. I could not have been more wrong. In more than 25 years in the music business, I've done many non-performing jobs, from orchestra librarian to music store owner. But my experience is just the tip of the iceberg. I'm on a mission to explore the exciting and necessary jobs that make performances possible. Come with me as we go beyond the stage. All right, so before we start this episode of Beyond the Stage, I wanted to give a little context for what you're about to watch or listen to. Now, this was recorded at the Midwest Clinic in Chicago in 2021, and so there's lots of people walking if you're watching the video, and lots of background noise if you're listening to it. And the person we're speaking to is Heath Jones. He's from Gwinnett County Schools in Georgia. He's been a professional educator for almost 30 years and is the music technology chair for the Georgia Music Teachers Association. Why am I telling you all this? Well, he and I started our conversation, and about 4 minutes in, I realized we never actually did a formal introduction. So I want to provide some context for who we're speaking to and what we're speaking about. And without further ado, in his own words, here is Heath Jones.
You know, I teach in Gwinnett County, Georgia, which is about 35 miles northeast of Atlanta. And, you know, in the state of Georgia, I guess it's been about 15 years ago, the state legislature came in and they set up a package of tax incentives and tax breaks to try to lure the film and television industry into our state.
Like the show The Walking Dead.
As one example,
I was a big fan of it. I kind of fell off it, but you know, it did showcase Atlanta pretty well.
Yeah, The Walking Dead, Stranger Things, that are filmed there. Pinewood Studios, which is just southwest of Atlanta, is like one of the, it may be the largest production studio in North America. But a lot of the Marvel Avengers movies were made there. Spider-Man, Homecoming.
I remember, when Homecoming came out, I remember reading about that it was like one of the biggest sound stages in the country or the world at the time. It was a pretty incredible set.
Yeah, it's one of the largest in the world. It's amazing that Georgia is in the top 5 locations to make a film in the world.
Yeah.
And some of the things that are interesting about it is, you know, a lot of times people think about Hollywood as being California, you know, out around in LA. The thing about it is, when they come to Georgia, the cost of living is substantially less than, you know, what it is there on the West Coast. And the tax incentives, they get, you know, up to like a 30% tax break on and it's not that they have to produce the entire film in Georgia. You know, it's, you know, a percentage or whatever. But you know, with some of the like the Marvel movies, they had an orchestra recording the soundtrack in London.
Sure.
But so most of the production has to be in Georgia, and then if you watch through the credits at the end, you'll see the little peach and the logo, you know, that they recognize that. But you know, it's when it literally costs less money to make the film here. The cost of living for those that work in the industry is less here, even though, you know, the union scale or whatever you want to put it doesn't change. And one of the other things really interesting to me when I was having a conversation with some folks that work in the industry, that one of the reasons why Georgia is so attractive is that we have all 4 seasons.
Yeah.
So, you know, in Georgia, if you need to be on the ocean, we got the ocean. If you need to be in the mountains, we've got mountains. If you need to be in a big metropolitan city, we've got Atlanta. If you need, a dilapidated barn out in the middle of nowhere, we got that too. So there are a lot of things geographically and climate-wise that we've got it. You don't have to, if you're in LA and you need a snowy scene, you've got to, make the snow.
And you just touched upon why Peter Jackson filmed Lord of the Rings in New Zealand. It was cheaper, but he had access to all of that kind of stuff, and scouting sets and whatnot. And the same thing. But yeah, you said all 4 seasons. In Georgia, I joke that in Colorado where we are, we have 2 seasons. We have construction season and we have Christmas Day, because it seriously goes year round. But we're digressing here. I'm sorry, Heath. Introduce yourself. Let's tell who you are and what you do. I mean, I do this. I just dive into conversations.
No,
but we're here at the Midwest Conference, and we met up and started talking about podcasting and using technology to deliver content educationally. And I really wanted to have this conversation, so I'm glad you had the time. So tell me who you are and what you do.
Yeah, my name's Heath Jones, and I'm a music educator. This is my 26th year in the classroom. I spent 15 years as a high school band director. Before I moved into middle school, I thought, well, how hard can middle school band be? Wow. So much respect to middle school band directors. They are a different animal. And through a conversation for another day, I gradually made this transition into music technology. And where I teach in Gwinnett County, Georgia, our high schools have had a music technology curriculum for a number of years. Mm-hmm. When I went to middle school, part of the story is they wanted me to teach a general music class, which I wasn't really very interested in teaching, and students aren't very interested in taking. So it was like, so what can I do that would be engaging for the students? And if you have engaged students, that makes teaching a lot easier. So technology, I basically went and said, I know there's some high schools out there that have this equipment. Why don't we teach this at the middle school? Can we get that equipment at our middle school? So the following year we did. They amazingly enough, they gave me the equipment. It was my school and 5 other middle schools. So we have 32 workstations, and at each workstation is a iMac desktop computer. Every station has a MIDI keyboard synthesizer, and we have some other. Everything's connected with the communication system, so the students have their headphones on, they can work. So the 2 problems were, 1, I didn't know anything about technology, and 2, there was no curriculum.
Other than that, what's the problem?
Exactly. So literally, we were building the plane as we were taking off.
Yep.
So, after a year, when they came in and said, well, we've got to have a curriculum, and somebody's got to write it, and I don't know. They went, you write the curriculum. Me?
How hard could it be?
How hard could it be? But here's the thing that was, there's some serendipity in that, because when I sat down to create the curriculum, I had to write it in a way that I knew how to teach. And so my background is as a musician. I knew music. I knew how to teach music. Technology was what was unfamiliar. So right from the get-go, my approach to it is I'm not teaching technology because that's not really my expertise. Music is. So I treat the technology as an instrument of creation. So if you're a band director, you're not a how to play the clarinet teacher. You're trying to teach the music. You're trying to teach students about music and how to perform and be a musician. The clarinet just happens to be the tool that they're using, and you have to teach them how to use the tool. So the purpose of learning a clarinet isn't to know how to operate a clarinet, it's to make music. So the technology, the way I approach it is, the purpose of the technology isn't to understand how to run a soundboard or a microphone, but how do you use that to create music? So it's very grounded in music first. But if someone said, in a word, what is it you're trying to teach your students? For me, it would be creativity. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to teach them how to be creative. And creativity is different than imagination. You can imagine things all day and never act on it. In order to be creative, you have to act on that imagination.
Sure.
So to actually take an idea and develop that just a thought, and develop that into a finished product. And with my students, particularly at the middle school level, it's very introductory. So a lot of what I'm doing, and I tell people it's a mile wide and an inch deep. I try to show them all the things that they could potentially do with this that fall under the category of music technology, which is kind of like saying, well, you could be a scientist. Well, there are hundreds of different scientists, which is kind of where we're eventually getting to with the industry in Georgia and non-musical career paths.
Sure, yeah.
That there's lots of potential there. So if the students discover something like creating a soundtrack or being a sound editor, or doing live sound, if they find something like that they're interested in, at our high school level, the high school curriculum is more detailed. They get a chance to kind of dig into the things they're most interested in. So what I'm doing with them first and foremost is trying to show them all the things that they could creatively do with music or sound. Really, we call it music technology. I would really call it sound technology.
Well, it's a difference between content and context, and I've heard it said that the glass is the context and the water is the content. And so depending on how big the glass is, what shape it is, then that's going to dictate what fits into it. And so you're giving them the context to understand, this technology has many applications, musical and otherwise, and it's up to you to put the content inside of it and then leverage that to accomplish whatever it is you're trying to do.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's a great analogy, a way to look at it. And it's, one of the things that gets to be, somewhat frustrating, because one of the things I try to do is try to connect our school programs. I'm also the music technology division chair for the Georgia Music Educators Association. So our teachers group in the state of Georgia kind of head up all things music tech. And
did you mean to do that, or did you miss a meeting?
Actually, that was fairly intentional.
Good. Okay.
So, and that was really interesting too, because the person who was the head of that division before I took over was not involved with teaching music technology at all.
Well, that's no good.
Well, and but the reason for that is, for many years, if you said music technology to a band director or orchestra director or something, to them that meant, oh, well, I have a metronome on my phone, or, I can project an image of my score on a screen or something. It was, digital tools or computer tools that they used to supplement their teaching tools, So they didn't think of, our music technology was not considered a content area. They had choir, band, jazz band, general music, but music technology was a tool. It wasn't content. So that was, but to their credit, the leadership in GMEA was very open to, creating that content area with teachers. So that's one of the things that I do, is also to share with other music educators in my state that this is a content area, and it's an option that's available for students. And so I'm trying to bring together our teachers, the industry in our state, and higher ed to kind of work together to continue to build this in Georgia. And the industry and public schools are great. They're very eager to get together because the industry understands that it's developing a workforce, there in Georgia. When this first started, all of the new employment in our state was, contractors, electricians, builders who were like building the facilities. But the creative workforce, the script writers, the the music composers, the set designers, that creative production part was having to come from New York City or LA or Vancouver. So they were having to import that creative workforce. But now we're at the point in Georgia where the industry says, for this to continue to thrive, we need to create that workforce here in our state. But it's also to the benefit of the kids and the citizens in our state to show them the career opportunities that are available to them right there. So that's a big part of what we're trying to do too. Because, even, if a kid wants to be an attorney, well, the film and television and media and music industry is full of attorneys.
Unfortunately, yes.
Or, if they want to be a chef, if they're interested in fashion or makeup, a friend of mine that I've met, Matthew Head, who's a television music producer, was telling me a story that he was on a set, one of the Marvel movies, and there was a guy sitting over in a chair, drinking coffee, and he had, a bag on the floor. And Matthew said he looked at somebody and was like, "Who is that?" And he was like, "Oh, well, that's the physician on the set." But the job of that physician was specifically to make sure that the stars of the movie didn't get sick.
Sure.
So, because he's like, you have extras and all this other kind of stuff. You set up your shoot schedule, but if all of a sudden your lead actor has a sore throat and everything stops.
Yeah, if they can't talk, then you're dead in the water.
You're dead in the water. He goes, but in the industry, they hire physicians whose job is just to make sure that those people don't get sick. So, there's such a wide, no matter what you're interested in, there's probably a place in the entertainment industry that you can get involved with. Specifically when it comes to music and sound technology, there's a lot of stuff there too, which is where kind of the niche where, I'm trying to teach kids, but also, part of what we're doing is talking about like podcasting, like
Sure.
what we're doing right here.
Let's take a quick timeout to hear from our sponsors. Beyond the Stage is proudly sponsored by Boomer Music Company, Northern Colorado's band and orchestra experts since 1976. If you need instrument rentals, repairs, sheet music, or accessories, Boomer Music has you covered. Come to our Fort Collins showroom or visit us online at www.boomermusiccompany.com. ThePodcastingStore.com is your one-stop shop for all things podcasting and remote learning, and a proud sponsor of Beyond the Stage. Whether you're a novice remote teacher or a veteran podcaster, we have the gear and the knowledge to take your content to the next level to better engage your audience. Check us out at www.thepodcastingstore.com and see what solutions we have for you. Now, let's continue our journey beyond the stage.
And a little bit about my background for non-performing careers in music, I actually ended up working as an orchestra librarian for a while. And I got my start in that in Philadelphia, and that was just, it's a long and sordid tale how that all goes, but you want to talk about an industry that I had no idea that was even a job. I mean, you don't go into classical music saying I'm going to be a librarian. You go into and it's confusing what you do with how you do it. It's like, I'm a musician. I make these performances happen, but I'm not on the stage. I'm not the one that's out there doing that. And it's such an interesting role and a side of it that whenever I tell people, they're like, oh, of course there's someone that does that. There has to be. But that's not what you see when you're growing up. It's not what you see from ground level. I mean, we went to the CSO brass concert, and I was pointing out to Braden when Carol, the librarian, came on, I'm like, yep, that's the librarian. She's put the scores out. She's make sure the folders are all there. Because the players could do it, but how much can they do? I mean, everyone needs, when you focus on your job, the thing that you do the best and that you're specializing in, everything is better for it. I mean, I've heard it called, it's like an iceberg. and then you see a little bit above the water and the penguins and all that, but everything underneath that you don't see is what makes it happen. It's all that support staff. It's the ushers. It's the administration. It's all of that factors into making that all happen. And the technologies is another wing of all of that at this point. And I think it's a crucial one that needs to be kept in mind as we're going forward with delivering content. So in that vein, what kind of stuff are your kids doing?
Well, my curriculum, I base everything around the 5 elements of music. So we're talking about rhythm, melody, harmony, form, and expression.
Uh-huh.
So, typically we'll start with rhythm, and we'll be working either in GarageBand or Soundtrap, which is a great cloud-based DAW or digital audio workstation. And with rhythm, actually, one of the things I start off with them is an electronic instrument called a TR-808. It was made by Roland back in the late 70s, early 80s, and it was referred to as a drum machine.
Uh-huh.
And it was basically an early sequencer. But the way in an 808 is still, you'll hear, whether or not you know it, you'll still hear an 808 used in a lot of music today. But the way an 808's laid out is there's 16 buttons, and those 16 buttons are grouped into groups of 4 that are then there's like a group of red buttons, white buttons, yellow buttons, and orange buttons. And if you look at a modern DAW, if you look at what we call the piano roll for a MIDI instrument, the way that is organized is exactly like the 808. So each color represents one beat. So you've got your red, your white, your yellow, your orange. There's 4 beats, and each of those beats is broken up into 4 parts. So that's where you get your 16 buttons. So I use the 808 to teach them about, these 4 beats represent 1 bar. So when you look at the machine, you're looking at 1 measure of music. And then we'll go into the piano roll with the MIDI and go, now if you notice this, let's zoom in. You see that, we have these columns and rows, and in each bar, the columns are broken down into 16 columns within a bar. And sometimes I have arguments with some of my traditional music colleagues who ask, well, you're not teaching notation. They don't know, they're like, do you teach them the names of the lines and spaces on a music staff? And I'm like, no. Well, do you teach them how to draw a quarter and an eighth note in traditional notation? And I go, no. And they go, well, don't you think they need to learn music notation? I went, absolutely. I teach them music notation, but that's not what I teach them. And, the purpose of music notation is to capture the musical idea and share it with other people.
Yeah.
So why did Mozart write down all of his music? So he could capture his idea and then share that music. Hey, here's the symphony I wrote, here's your part. So with technology, we're doing exactly the same thing. We're creating ideas, capturing the idea, and then we're notating it in the computer. So they learn quarter notes and eighth notes and half notes and whole notes, but they learn what it looks like in the computer. And
and to someone who criticizes that, I'd say, well, you use a computer, don't you? Like, yeah. Well, what's that in binary? Do you know what the components of that are? Does it matter? And I was actually listening to a podcast just on the way out here. It was talking about about alphabetical order, why it's in that order, and the answer is no one knows. But the adoption of it was pretty obvious when that came around, and they even had to have disclaimers in the front of books saying, well, instead of being in order of importance, so you might see servants before kings, but here's the letters and how we're going to do it. Well, and they were talking about how we're actually shifting into a place where alphabetical order doesn't matter anymore, because we're doing relational searches based on the content, not by any key that's artificially applied on top of it. So it's the same thing. It's like, is music notation obsolete? I don't know if I'd go that far, but yeah, what you're saying is if you're not teaching them eighth notes, quarter notes, all that, are you still teaching them music? Of course you are.
Yeah. And, as a band director or an orchestra director, well, yes, I'm teaching them that type of notation because that's the language that we use to communicate in that setting. In what I'm working with my students in the digital world of music, it's trivia really. It's not necessary for them to know that. It's interesting when you mentioned about the alphabet because one of the things that I talk to my kids about that they all know Spotify.
Yeah.
And I'm sure I'm going to miss some of the details, but the gist of the story is as I understand it, is this. So the guy that started Spotify, growing up, he wanted to be a rock star. They had, garage band, they, went out and played some gigs and, that's what he wanted to be. But, it's kind of like wanting to be a pro athlete. It's, not many people make it to that level. So, that dream didn't come true. But he happened to be pretty good knowing about how to create a business and about, how to, use this technology. So he took that passion that he had for music to develop this company that would become Spotify. Mm-hmm. And with the alphabet, I tell when I talk to my kids about Spotify, I said, so the thing about that company, like they had to have someone who understood algorithms, because an algorithm is basically a mathematical system for sorting things. And I tell them, I said, the alphabet is based on an algorithm. Mm-hmm. This, then that, and this are the same, then this, then, and I said, so, for Spotify, he had to have someone who understood computer programming and computer language, but also understood algorithms, and also had to have an understanding about music, mm-hmm. so that they understood what musically is it that we're trying to sort, so that they begin, it's like, how do they know what music you prefer? Well, because they have all these different data points that they put in this algorithm to go, oh, well, they tend to like, bands that have two guitars and a female singer that use minor keys, and I think that's a great example of that,
Whoever thought that being a musicologist would be an in-demand skill set?
Oh my gosh, we wish we did then. So, but but it's, but yeah, so I'm teaching them how to create that music. We'll move on to harmony, we'll move on to melody. And they learn how to, create those, what it is. So, even when it comes to, teaching those things in a traditional way, again, they have to know how chords are notated in a DAW, and we don't use that on traditional, manuscript paper. But, they learn about, chord progressions and how you craft a melody to go with that chord progression. We'll move on. We do a unit on lyric writing. How, I love, particularly middle school students. Like, do you ever feel like you're talking to your mom or a teacher or somebody and you're like, I'm talking to you and you're just not listening to me? I said, music can be a really powerful way to get people to listen to what you have to say. So you sort of trick them into doing that. Yeah. And I went, the great thing that I love about music is you have to be able to tell this story in about 3.5 minutes. And, and so we start to talk about, how you craft lyrics and rhyming schemes, which is, ends up being a language arts lesson.
And it's a formula, that has worked for a very long time. And you can try to invent a new formula, but there's a reason why New Coke failed, because Old Coke worked. So you learn the context, and then you put your content into it, and then it's in a form that people can digest and understand.
And that's one of the challenges with teaching students, and I'm not casting dispersions on anyone, but we do a very good job of conditioning students to believe that the secret to success in school is to get to the correct answer as quickly as possible and avoid wrong answers at all costs. So in my class, they'll create something and they don't want to turn it in or share it because they're like, well, it doesn't sound very good. And I'll tell them, so with this assignment, show me where in the assignment it said you had to create a 4-bar drum track that sounds great. No, the assignment says it's got to be 4 bars. You got to use these 3 different sounds. So I tell them, I am evaluating you on, are you learning the process? I'm not evaluating you on your product, because the thing about it is, I said, anybody you listen to on the radio or Spotify that you like, the reason you like them is because one day they decided they were going to start making music, and on that day they were terrible. But they came back the next day and they kept trying to make music, and the next day it wasn't quite as bad, and they kept doing that until one day they were pretty good. And so I try to tell them part of the process of learning how to do, I tell them, you're going to make a lot of music you're going to make a lot of really bad sounding music before you ever start making something that sounds good. I went, but if you don't make that terrible sounding music, you're not ever going to get, to that other point. So, finally, it takes a while to convince them that, learn the process, and through doing it, you're going to get better. But they're like, it doesn't sound right. I'm like,
well, and the other way I look at it, I haven't done them in a while, but I like doing like obstacle course races, mud runs, things like that. And training for that, it's a mental game unto itself. And when you realize that working out today isn't training for the event, it's training for the next workout. So you're getting in shape to do the next workout, which is getting you in shape to do the next one. The only workout that you're actually training for the event is the last one. Because then you do the event, and by then, if you're prepped, the event isn't the accomplishment. It's the celebration of the accomplishment, which is being ready to do it.
Yeah.
Having gone through the process. So yeah, if on day one you say, well, it doesn't sound, like Britney Spears, of course it doesn't, and it shouldn't. Because if it did, you waited too long to start.
Right.
You should have been doing this years ago.
Yeah.
It's going to sound like wherever it sounds like, it's going to start wherever it starts, but then it's going to progress. And today's bad practice session is going to make you better for tomorrow's session, is going to make you better for the day after. And it really builds upon itself. And I think we, waxing poetic, live in a society that stands in front of a microwave saying faster, faster.
Right.
We have to put in the work to figure out the processes to make the product be what it is that we're trying to get to, whatever that happens to be.
Thank you for listening to Beyond the Stage. If you have ideas for future episodes or work in a non-performing role in the music industry and would like to tell your story, please contact me at drew@boomermusiccompany.com. I'm Drew Holmes. Thank you for listening as we explore careers in music beyond the stage.